What's up, everybody? Today, we'll be taking a trip back down memory lane as we look over a classic game. Hard to believe how much time has gone by since this game came out. Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. A game changer at the time. But how has this game held up after all this time? How is it 17 years later? Well, let's dive right into it with this intro. CoD is not what it used to be. Imagine seeing this in 2007.
50,000 people used to live here. Now it's a ghost town.
Our so-called leaders prostituted us to the West, destroyed our culture, our economies, our honor.
U.S. Marines stationed on high alert were given the order to invade the small
Just as they lay waste to our country, we shall lay waste to theirs.
You think this will stop the bloodshed?
Вы все равно скоро сдохнете.
We need to take him alive.
Do you feel the hype? Oh my gosh. The music, even though it's just scenes taken from the game with some camera work, forgive me, I'm not that well versed in the technical components of video game making, but wow, what an immersive presentation of what you are about to experience. And while the opening mission of this game is really good, I think that it's in the coup cutscene where President Al-Fulani is overthrown and executed. You get to experience, you see it from his point of view. That is some immersive storytelling. And it really, just imagine the guts that this game, that the developers had. This was 2007, in the middle of the war on terror, when the United States military was engaged in two unconventional conflicts in the Middle East. And even today, this cutscene is relevant. It really begs the question as you see al-Assad, ironically with that name, ranting about the way that his nation had been colluding and collaborating with the West. And it really makes me wonder and think a bit about, why does the U.S. government support a number of non-democratic regimes in the Middle East? And as I've said in a previous video, we need to keep in mind that democracy, as good or not good as it might be, it's still a Western idea. And if states choose, despite their complicated history with Western imperialism, choose to take on that form of government, the imperialism will return in some form. How are they supposed to look their people in the eye and say, oh, those Western countries that exploited us so long ago, they had the right governing system in mind. Yeah, they knew what they were doing. And as a result, the U.S. government and other Western governments, we still collaborate and cooperate with nations that perhaps aren't prepared for democracy. It's just not really feasible at this time. But backing authoritarian nations, and I don't know the lore, it's probably not honestly the in depth about what President Al-Fulani might have been like in this fictional, small but oil-rich Middle Eastern country. We don't know how authoritative he might have been, but backing governments like that can backfire, just like we see in the this opening scene right here. And I find it so ironic that the villain of this game is named Al-Assad. I don't know if at the time the writers were trying to make a reference to the Syrian dictatorship that had been, at the time this game came out in 2007, had already been entrenched in Syria for decades. It's only since this game's release that Syria became a serious flashpoint for civil war and radical Islam proxy conflict, and Bashar al-Assad, being the dictator, his reputation precedes himself. And just a few weeks ago, his regime collapsed and he fled to Moscow. If he hadn't been able to escape, then without a doubt, he would be experiencing what Al-Fulani goes through in this cutscene. It's just interesting that in this game, the villain is named Al-Assad. Food for thought. If Al-Assad had not gotten away, this is what would have happened to him. Or if we take a look at Afghanistan, Ashraf Ghani, this is what would have happened to him too at the hands of the Taliban, without a doubt. Diving into the gameplay, I must say that I was very impressed by the attention to detail within these levels. For one, in the mission that follows, you can actually find this TV recording that is talking about the developments in the Middle East. Just a small little detail that didn't need to be there, but it really adds immersion to the game.
Accusing Al-Fulani of placing foreign interests ahead of those of his countrymen. While the exact time and location of the American invasion have been withheld for security reasons, the U.S. Secretary of Defense stated that the forces deployed would be significant, and that al-Assad would not be permitted to further destabilize the region through military expansionism. And less than a day after the televised execution of deposed Arab leader Yasser al-Fulani, U.S. Marines stationed on high alert in the Persian Gulf were given the order to invade the small but oil-rich nation. His successor, Khaled al-Assad, conducted the high-profile execution personally on national television, accusing al-Fulani of placing foreign interests ahead of those of his countrymen.
I will say one thing that I find odd, and I guess that's not really in this game per se, it's in the remastered. I don't understand why they didn't make Nikolai's remastered character model look like his Modern Warfare 3 character model. That couldn't have been that hard to do, right? In these missions, there really seemed to be a lot more liberty that you could take as a player than I was expecting, especially for such an old game. For instance, in this mission where you're trying to sneak past and evade Russian forces, I was having trouble with the controls since I was so new to the game. So I got our team discovered, and I thought we were toast. I thought I'd automatically die and have to reset. I mean, that's how so many video games work these days, especially so many Call of Duties that come out with a new one each year. And if you goof up one little thing, you seem to instantly die. It happens all the time. Well, I was very surprised that for this whole mission, you could actually fight your way through and make it. It was definitely a challenge, but we pulled it off. Very unorthodox. Most Call of Duties these days do not give you that much autonomy. I did notice that in I think it's the War Pig mission, you can honestly seriously dodge the ambush by the insurgents if you just run around here. You don't really need to take the stairway. Just for future notice if you're trying to rush through the game. But I really like the way that where this mission ends, War Pig, the following subsequent mission, or excuse me, I believe it's the Bog, where the Bog mission ends, where you've just rescued the tank, the subsequent mission, War Pig, it actually picks up right where the previous mission left off. It's the same location. That really adds to the immersion and in-depth experience of playing this story. It took me a couple times to notice that, but when I figured that out, I appreciated it so much more. The missions that are set in the Middle East are by far the most fun, and I'd say the most replayable, honestly. And they're great. No complaints. I will say, though, one thing that I find odd is that there seems to be a continuity error in the opening cutscenes for these. The exact location of the small but oil-rich nation changes. Sometimes it seems to be in this sliver of Saudi Arabia, directly north of Yemen. Then there's other parts where it seems to be much closer to Kuwait. And then when the nuke goes off, it seems to be smack dab in the middle of Iran. This is also the case on the remastered game. I don't know if maybe they just didn't want to be too controversial on where the location of this small nation was, or maybe it was just a screw up, something that the developers thought nobody would notice. I mean, I assume the average Call of Duty player, maybe in 2007, even though the War on Terror was going on, this might have been their first introduction to the Middle East. But you got people like me that are thoroughly interested in international affairs, and I noticed that on my second playthrough. Ultimately, even though it's been almost 18 years since this game came out, it still holds up very well. It still looks very good, especially considering the time it came out. The story is timeless and set us up brilliantly for the wonderful success that was Modern Warfare 2, a masterpiece. And this game, its story was just, it really went for it. Think about that. Portraying a U.S. invasion of a Middle Eastern country while the United States was at war in that component of the world. Really seems to embody an era of creativity and passion in all components of the development process for video games that sadly is lacking in the gaming industry today. It seems the pendulum is starting to swing back and that we've had some better games recently, but by and large, it seems that gaming has declined of late, especially when it comes to storytelling. This game still holds up all these years later.